There is a number that the United States Navy watches very carefully. It is not a budget figure. It is not a kill count. It is a simple integer, and it passed a threshold sometime around 2024 that no American naval planner wanted to see. For the first time since World War II, the United States Navy was no longer the largest fleet on the planet. Not in total displacement, not yet. But in the number of commissioned warships, China had pulled ahead. More than 370 ships and submarines flying the red flag, against roughly 292 flying the stars and stripes. And the strangest part of all this is where it started. In 1949, Mao Zedong's navy consisted of wooden junks, armed with mountain guns. River gunboats left over from a Japanese occupation. A handful of rusting hulls handed over by officers who had switched sides in the final days of a civil war. There was no shipbuilding industry to speak of, no nuclear submarines, no aircraft carriers, no destroyers, nothing. What happened between that moment and today is one of the most dramatic military transformations in recorded history. And it was built one warship at a time. This is every one of them. Chapter 1: From Junks to Jets, the Soviet Gift. The People's Liberation Army Navy was formally established on April 23, 1949, barely months before the People's Republic itself. Mao declared that same year that to resist foreign aggression, China must build a powerful navy. It was an ambition that would take 3/4 of a century to fully realize. But the first serious step came not from a Chinese shipyard. It came from Moscow. In the early 1950s, the Soviet Union transferred a collection of submarines to give the plan its first underwater capability. The first were 4 Soviet M-class submarines, small coastal hunter-killer boats designed for shallow water operations. They were pennanted 201 through 204 and named under the designation National Defense Numbers 21 through 24. Not exactly a menacing fleet, but they were the first submarines China ever operated, and they established the template for everything that followed. Right behind them came 4 S-class submarines, Soviet ocean-going attack boats with considerably more range and capability than the M-class coastal vessels. These 4 hulls, pennanted 401 through 404 and named under the new China designation, gave the plan its first taste of what a real underwater force could look like. Neither class was destined for greatness. The M-class boats were retired by 1963. The S-class followed soon after. But they were the foundation, and the Soviets had seen enough potential in the relationship to go much further. In 1955, Moscow handed Beijing something far more valuable than a few aging submarines. They provided blueprints, tooling, production equipment, and technical advisors to allow China to build warships domestically. The result was the Type 033, China's licensed copy of the Soviet Romeo-class diesel-electric attack submarine. And here is where things get genuinely interesting. The plan didn't just build a few of them. They built more than 80. 80 hulls. Some were assembled in Wuhan, some at Jiangnan. The production continued even after the Sino-Soviet split severed the relationship entirely, because by that point, China had learned enough to carry on without Soviet supervision. The Type 033 became the backbone of Chinese submarine power through the 1960s and 1970s, and a significant number were exported to Egypt, North Korea, and other client states. For a navy that had started with wooden junks, this was a genuine industrial achievement. But diesel submarines have limits. They need to surface. They need air. They are detectable when they snorkel. The next ambition was something that could disappear beneath the water and stay there indefinitely. Chapter 2: Going nuclear. The submarines China was never supposed to build. The Type 091, known in Western intelligence circles as the Han class, was China's first nuclear-powered attack submarine. The keel was laid in 1968. The first boat was commissioned in 1974, and by almost every technical measure, it was a disaster. American naval intelligence described the Han class as the noisiest nuclear submarine operated by any fleet. The reactors were plagued with reliability problems. Crew radiation exposure was a documented issue. The acoustic signature was so loud that tracking it was, according to one assessment, almost embarrassingly easy. There were 5 Han-class boats built in total, and they spent much of their service lives dealing with one mechanical crisis or another. And yet they mattered enormously, not because they were capable, but because they existed at all. China had joined the short list of nations that could build and operate nuclear-powered submarines. The technical problems were real, but they were solvable problems. The know-how was accumulating. The ballistic missile submarine program ran in parallel, and it was even more troubled. The Type 092, known in NATO as the Jia class, was commissioned in 1987 as China's first nuclear-armed submarine. It carried 12 JL-1 missiles, each with a range of just over 1,700 kilometers. The problem was that the Type 092 was so unreliable and so acoustically loud that it never conducted a single deterrent patrol. Not one. It spent most of its career in port at Jiangezhuang, maintained but essentially unusable as a strategic asset. It was a symbol rather than a weapon. That changed with the Type 094. Known as the Jin class, the first boat entered service in 2007 and represented China's actual entry into credible sea-based nuclear deterrence. 6 hulls were eventually built. Each carried 12 JL-2 missiles with a range of 3,900 nautical miles, later updated in some boats to the JL-3 at 5,400 nautical miles, a figure that put the continental United States within reach from Chinese home waters for the first time in history. A crew of 140. Nuclear-powered, essentially unlimited range. The Type 094 is the reason the U.S. Congress now receives annual reports specifically about Chinese submarine capabilities. On the conventional attack side, China eventually fielded the Type 093, known as the Shang class. The first Shang-1 boats entered service around 2006, followed by the longer and more capable Shang-2 variant, designated Type 093A. 5 hulls total have been confirmed. They are substantially quieter than the Han class, equipped with 6 533mm torpedo tubes, and designed for blue water operations far from Chinese shores. Then came a development that caught Western analysts almost completely off guard. The Type 039, known as the UN class, entered service in 2006 as China's first submarine equipped with air-independent propulsion. This means it can operate without snorkeling, running quietly on a fuel cell system that generates no exhaust and produces almost no acoustic signature. In 2006, a single Yuan-class boat surfaced within 5 miles of the USS Kitty Hawk carrier strike group during exercises in the Pacific, having tracked the group undetected for days. The U.S. Navy was not aware the submarine was there until it chose to be seen. 17 Yuan-class hulls have been built, with exports delivered to allies including Pakistan, and now under construction at the Bohai shipyard at Huludao, the only facility in China certified to build nuclear submarines. A new generation is taking shape. The Type 095 attack submarine and the Type 096 ballistic missile submarine. Commercial satellite imagery has revealed new construction halls large enough to assemble 4 or 5 nuclear submarines simultaneously. The hull dimensions observed suggest boats significantly larger, quieter, and more capable than anything currently in Chinese service. The Type 096 in particular is expected to carry a new, longer-range SLBM that would give China a second strike capability from positions the U.S. Navy cannot easily monitor. Chapter 3: Surface Teeth, Destroyers and Frigates from Luda to Renhai. While the submarine program was struggling through its early decades, the surface fleet was being built from a very different starting point. Soviet blueprints again, but this time for surface combatants. The Luda class, formerly designated Type 051, entered service in 1971 as China's first domestically designed destroyer, though designed is perhaps generous. The hull drew heavily from the Soviet Kotlin class. The displacement was around 3,670 tons. The armament was a mix of surface-to-surface missiles and gun mounts that would not have looked out of place in the mid-1950s. 18 Luda-class hulls were eventually built across multiple sub-variants, making it the most numerous destroyer class in Chinese history until it was surpassed by modern programs. By the time the last Luda was retired in 2021, the gap between it and the ships replacing it was almost incomprehensible. What came next required foreign help China could not provide itself. The Luhu class, Type 052, commissioned in 1994, was built with American General Electric LM-2500 gas turbines, the same engines used in the U.S. Navy's own destroyers. That technology transfer ended permanently after the Tiananmen Square crackdown, and only 2 Luhu hulls were ever completed. They were nonetheless significant because they established that China was serious about blue water capability and willing to pay for the technology to get there. The Sovremeny-class destroyers, purchased directly from Russia in 1999 and 2000 in 2 batches of 2 ships each, plugged a gap that Chinese industry could not yet fill. The Sovremeny brought the SS-N-22 Sunburn anti-ship missile, a supersonic sea skimmer that American analysts in the 1990s considered one of the most difficult threats to defend against at sea. China acquired 4 of these ships specifically because they provided a capability no domestic design could match. By 2021, all 4 had been retired, overtaken by Chinese-built alternatives that were in every measurable way superior. The Type 052C, known as the Luoyang 2, arrived in 2004 and introduced something Western observers had not expected: a Chinese-built phased array radar system and a 48-cell vertical launch system. 6 hulls were built. They serve with the East and South Sea fleets. Their combat systems represented the first genuine step toward what the U.S. Navy calls an area air defense capability. The ability to protect not just the ship itself, but other vessels in a formation. Then the Type 052D, the Luoyang 3, and the numbers become almost difficult to process. Commissioned from 2014, 64-cell vertical launch system, improved sensors, full fleet air defense capability. As of 2026, more than 29 hulls are in active service, with 7 more launched in 2025 alone. The Luoyang 3 is being produced at a rate that no other navy outside the United States has matched in the modern era. But even the Luoyang 3 has been eclipsed. The Type 055, which NATO classifies as a cruiser despite China calling it a destroyer, was commissioned beginning January 2020. The first hull is named Nanchang. Displacement, approximately 13,000 tons. Length, 180 meters. Armament, 128 vertical launch system cells, loaded with a mix of HQ-9B long-range surface-to-air missiles, YJ-18 anti-ship cruise missiles, and CJ-10 land attack cruise missiles. It is heavier and more heavily armed than both the American Arleigh Burke destroyer and the Ticonderoga cruiser. In December 2025, Chinese state media confirmed the first test firing of the YJ-20 anti-ship ballistic missile from a Type 055, a weapon designed to strike carrier groups at ranges previously achievable only from land. The 10th hull has been launched. The 11th and 12th are nearing completion. China is simultaneously producing the Type 055 at Dalian and the Type 052D at Jiangnan, and the combined output has at peak years reached 10 destroyers in a single calendar year. No other navy on Earth is currently doing that. The frigate story runs alongside all of this, beginning in 1975 with the Jianghu class, Type 053H, a Soviet-influenced design that lacked air conditioning, helicopter facilities, and effective missiles. But that was produced in over 30 hulls, and that kept the plan's surface force numerically viable through the 1980s. The Jianghui class, Type 053H2G, appeared in 1991 as the first Chinese frigate built with helicopter operations as a design requirement, rather than an afterthought. The Type 054, the Jiangkai 1, entered service in 2005. Just 2 hulls, a transitional design. What mattered was what followed, the Type 054A, the Jiangkai 2, with 33 hulls commissioned, a 32-cell vertical launch system, and blue water endurance. It is the most successful Chinese frigate ever built, the workhorse of planned task groups in the Indian Ocean, the Gulf of Aden, and the Western Pacific. Chapter 4. The Corvette Factory and the Coastal Shield. While destroyers and frigates attracted the headlines, a quieter story was unfolding in the shallow waters closer to home. The Type 037, known as the Hainan class, entered production in the 1960s as a submarine chaser, a small coastal patrol vessel designed to hunt submarines in the confined waters off China's coast. More than 100 hulls were eventually built. They were exported to North Korea, Bangladesh, and Egypt, making them among the first Chinese-designed military vessels to achieve meaningful foreign sales. During the Taiwan Strait crises and the Sino-Vietnamese War, the Type 037 was the face of Chinese coastal naval power. By 2012, that era was over. The Type 056 Corvette was an entirely new concept, a modular design available in 4 distinct configurations: patrol, anti-submarine warfare, anti-ship, and anti-aircraft. It was the first Chinese warship designed from the outset around a plug-and-play weapons architecture. Over 60 hulls were built for the plan. The original Type 056 hulls were subsequently transferred to the Coast Guard with their missiles removed, replaced in frontline service by the upgraded Type 056A variant, with improved anti-submarine sensors and torpedoes. The recycling of combat capability across fleets was itself a sign of how fast the plan was growing, its own recent designs already being handed down to secondary roles before most navies had finished studying them. Chapter 5. Carriers. From a Ukrainian hull to electromagnetic catapults in 12 years. The carrier story begins with a deception so transparent that nobody was deceived. In 1998, a Chinese company purchased an unfinished Soviet Kuznetsov-class aircraft carrier hull from Ukraine. The stated purpose was to convert it into a floating casino and entertainment complex in Macau. The hull had no engines, no weapons, no operational systems of any kind. It was on paper a tourist attraction. In reality, it was towed to Dalian shipyard, where Chinese naval engineers spent over a decade studying its internal architecture, its flight deck layout, its arresting wire systems, and every other technical detail that had taken the Soviets decades to develop. The ship that emerged was commissioned in 2012 as the Liaoning, China's first aircraft carrier. Ski jump bow ramp, conventionally powered, capable of embarking around 24 J-15 fighters. The Liaoning was always described officially as a training ship, and that was at least partially true. It was a school for an entire generation of Chinese carrier aviation officers, pilots, and deck crew who had never operated from a carrier before. The lessons it taught were applied directly to what came next. The Shandong Type 002, commissioned in December 2019, was China's first fully indigenous aircraft carrier, built without foreign blueprints, without foreign components, and without foreign technical advisors. Same ski jump design as the Liaoning, similar displacement, same J-15 air wing, but it was built entirely by Chinese workers at a Chinese shipyard using Chinese steel. That fact alone represented a capability threshold that most analysts had not expected China to reach until the late 2020s. Then came the Fujian Type 003, launched June 17, 2022, and beginning sea trials in early May 2024. It is the largest warship any Asian nation has ever built. Estimated full load displacement, approximately 80,000 tons. And instead of a ski jump ramp, it is equipped with electromagnetic catapults, the same launch system concept used on the American Gerald Ford class. Electromagnetic catapults allow aircraft to launch carrying heavier fuel and weapons loads than a ski jump permits, fundamentally changing the tactical options available to the embarked air wing. The Fujian can operate fixed-wing aircraft at full combat capability, something neither the Liaoning nor the Shandong could achieve. Sea trials were still ongoing as of 2025, and some analysts expected it would be several years before the ship began regular deployments. But its commissioning, when it comes, will mark a qualitative leap in Chinese carrier aviation. A fourth carrier has begun construction. Its specifications have not been officially announced. Reports suggest it may be nuclear-powered. A dedicated drone carrier, whose embarked air wing would consist entirely of unmanned aerial vehicles, has also been reported in early design phases. In 12 years, China went from no aircraft carrier to 3 in the water and 2 more in some stage of development. That rate of expansion has no precedent in the post-war era. Chapter 6: Amphibious Power, Building the Force That Could Cross a Strait. Everything discussed so far, the submarines, the destroyers, the carriers, describes a fleet capable of controlling sea lanes and projecting air power. But there is a third mission that none of those platforms can accomplish alone: putting soldiers ashore on a hostile beach. The Type 037 submarine chasers could support coastal operations, but could not project ground forces. The Luda-class destroyers were warships, not transports. What the plan needed, and spent decades without, was a serious amphibious capability. The Type 071, known as the Yuzhou class, was the answer when it entered service in 2007. An amphibious transport dock displacing around 25,000 tons, capable of carrying 800 soldiers, 4 LCAC air cushion landing craft, and a pair of helicopters. The Type 071 gave the PLAN its first genuine ability to project Marine Corps forces across open water at range. 8 hulls have been built. The Type 075, the Yushin class, took that capability to a different level entirely. a flat-deck helicopter carrier displacing approximately 40,000 tons, comparable to an American Wasp-class amphibious assault ship, capable of embarking a full Marine battalion with its own attack helicopters, transport helicopters, and landing craft. 4 hulls are now in service as of 2026. Their primary stated purpose is power projection and humanitarian operations. Their actual utility in a Taiwan scenario, which military planners on both sides of the Pacific think about constantly, is the ability to land armored forces on a coastline defended by a modern military. In August 2022, in the weeks following a visit to Taiwan by the Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, the People's Liberation Army conducted exercises around Taiwan involving an average of 13 to 14 warships per day. Type 055 cruisers, Type 052D destroyers, Type 054A frigates. The exercises were described by analysts as broadly consistent with a rehearsal for maritime blockade and amphibious assault. The amphibious force, 24 vessels currently on order across carrier, submarine, destroyer, and landing ship categories, is the part of that equation that makes the rehearsal operationally meaningful. Chapter 7. The number. In 2026, the People's Liberation Army Navy operates 405 frontline commissioned vessels by active count, more than 400 when auxiliary ships are excluded, more than 630 when the full surface force is tallied. 3 aircraft carriers, 4 amphibious assault ships, 8 amphibious transport docks, over 70 nuclear and conventionally powered submarines, more than 60 multi-role destroyers, more than 50 modern frigates, over 50 corvettes. Approximately 70% of those hulls were launched after 2010. The average age of a planned warship is lower than any comparable fleet in the world. The Jiangnan shipyard in Shanghai, the primary facility for destroyer and carrier construction, is, according to the U.S. Secretary of the Navy, larger than all 7 American naval shipyards combined. At peak output in 2019, China commissioned the equivalent of an entire Royal Navy fleet in a single year. In tonnage, the United States still leads significantly. 11 nuclear supercarriers, 21 large amphibious assault ships. The cumulative displacement of the American fleet remains well above China's. But the gap is closing, and the trajectory of production on both sides of the Pacific makes the arithmetic uncomfortable for Western planners. What started in 1949 with wooden junks and a declaration from Mao Zedong has become this: the largest navy in the world by vessel count, the fastest-growing navy by construction rate, and a force that the United States Navy is now publicly reorganizing its doctrine, its budget, and its strategy to confront. Every warship on this list was a deliberate step in a direction that was never concealed. The M-class submarines borrowed from Moscow, the Romeo-class hulls copied and multiplied, the Luda destroyers reverse-engineered from Soviet blueprints, the Han-class nuclear boats built despite crippling technical problems, the Sovremeny destroyers purchased to fill a gap while domestic industry caught up. And then, once it caught up, the gap closed permanently and the domestic designs began to surpass what had been imported. The Liaoning, the Shandong, the Fujian, the Type 055, the Type 094, the Type 056A. The Yuan-class submarine that surfaced next to an American carrier group and was only noticed when it chose to be. The weapons go where they go. The ships are already everywhere.